So welcome to another episode of the Fascia Masters podcast. So hello, Deanna.
Hello, Quinn. So happy to be here with you.
Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Very good. Very
Awesome.
good. Yeah, we just launched the PETS program today.
Yeah, that was
which is
quite the endeavor, I have to say. And
no kidding.
So very excited about it.
Yeah. So I think people are very excited about that. But today we're going to be talking about fascia and pain and the different kinds of pain and what's really going on with the body, the signals that it sends when we experience pain, and then of course, how can we manage pain and eventually get out of pain. And again, getting out of pain is an interesting thing to say because we're always going to experience pain, but more so getting out of either the acute, chronic, and emotional pain, at least for the time being, until something else happens because we're human.
Yep.
But let's just start off with the very generic question. From your perspective, at least, what is pain?
Pain is a signal. It's the body letting us know that there's an area needing some attention, some energy. So it's one of the most important things that we need to feel, because if I put my hand on a hot element and I'm burning it, if I don't have that pain signal, then I can actually do some real damage to myself because I don't have that impulse to pull it away right away. So it's the baby crying. It's giving you information that, okay, there's an area in my body that doesn't have optimal flow. So there's stress somehow in a particular area for a myriad of reasons. But pain is a signal letting us know that that specific space needs some time and attention.
And that can be acute pain, that can be the chronic pain, that can even be emotional pain. I know we're going to tap into that as well.
Absolutely.
So let's start off with acute pain because you mentioned if you put your hand on a hot element, that's like an acute sensation right then and there.
Yeah.
If I break my ankle or my wrist or I'm in a car accident and my back goes out, that's acute pain. So let's talk about it.
Okay. So acute pain is actually easy to understand because yes, you sprain your ankle, you have pain. There's no mystery around it. So essentially, let's just say as an example, you sprain your ankle, you've torn some ligaments. So the first thing that the body's going to do is send inflammation to this space because the body is designed to heal itself. And inflammation is really just directed blood flow. There's a lot of talk about how inflammation is really the root of all suffering. It's not actually. It's the response to the body needing extra time and attention, but we need to know what to do with that inflammation. So I've sprained my ankle. Now immediately I'm getting all of this swelling. So the typical response to that, as we talked before, is the RICE method: rest, ice, heat, or rest, ice, compression, elevation.
Yeah.
So the goal of that is essentially to limit the amount of inflammation to the space. But there's a problem with that because the inflammation is how we actually rebuild tissue. And we've had the experiences now where we know that if we address inflammation in a supportive way, as opposed to trying to limit it, we can rebuild the body very, very quickly and build it back to where it was before the injury, as opposed to now you have this injury and now you have scar tissue, which actually changes your fascia suit, so to speak. It's like,
Right.
You've got a Raggedy Ann doll and you cut it open and you take some stuff out and you seal it up, like it's never the same.
Right.
So we can actually rebuild that area. And also, as an athletic therapist, of course, we're trained to assess what exactly is going on. So the thing is, it's never just a ligament that's damaged. It's all of the tissue in that area. So there's going to be blood vessel fibers, nerve fibers, skin cells, fat cells, like all of these structures in an area where there's injury or damage are going to be affected. And the body needs to repair that. So if we allow the body to rebuild it properly through supporting inflammation, it's very quick. And the thing about pain is people are afraid of pain. So we've been indoctrinated to believe that pain is a bad thing. So it's like, okay, I've hurt my ankle. Oh, don't put any pressure on it, rest it, elevate it, avoid it, ice it.
But even before that, it's ice. The first thing you want to do is really ice. Because I remember if I was playing soccer when I was young and I twisted my ankle, get the ice, get the ice. That's like the number one thing that everybody knows to do when there's an injury. But ice can almost be, well, first of all, why do we want to apply ice? Why would they tell us to do that? It's because A, it feels good. but B, it's to reduce the inflammation.
Yeah, it's a way of controlling pain, but also pressure is a way of controlling pain. When we put pressure into an area of pain, we are activating those pressure fibers, which are larger than the pain fibers. So if we apply pressure, which actually creates heat, as opposed to icing, which numbs the area and slows down blood flow, then we actually are creating an activation of this healing system and cycle. So we sprain the ankle. The first thing that happens is there's debris. It's like you get into a car accident, there's stuff all over the road because things are broken. So the first thing we got to do is we got to take that stuff out of the way to create the space for the healing to take place. And if we ice that right away, we're basically freezing all of this debris in that space, because in order for there to be flow, there has to be energy. So as soon as we ice things, we actually really stop the body's innate healing response from happening. So, and again, pain is a big reason for this, because people are afraid, like, I don't want to put weight on that. I'm nervous. I'm scared. And of course, I mean, if you have some crazy fracture, like, there's different scenarios that have to be considered. But at the end of the day, we don't want to stop that inflammation. So pain is something that I believe we've really just been trained to fear, as opposed to recognize for what it is and what to do to respond to that. And if we do approach an injury in the moment with adding energy instead of slowing down energy, then we have this amazing opportunity to rebuild things. And I mean, you had that experience when you had that broken ankle.
Yeah.
I mean, what did we have you do, like, literally the day after a major surgery?
Yeah, that was really interesting. And first of all, I just want people to understand what inflammation is. So inflammation, because that's an innate response that our body has when there's an injury. And the inflammation is the blood that carries the oxygen, healing proteins, nutrients, minerals, everything to rebuild an injured site to go back to its original state. But I even know, and we can talk about this a little bit too, there's times, and this puzzled me initially, where you're like, do you know what? Injury is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to actually excel past where you initially were. So we can talk about that in a moment, but so now we have all this inflammation from that injury, and our body's doing it. We're not thinking about it, it's doing it. So why do we want to stop that? Well, it really doesn't make sense to do that. It's just because people fear it. They feel like inflammation's bad, but inflammation is the gold. Inflammation is what is really there to rebuild it, because it carries everything to rebuild it. And then it also carries out the debris, as you mentioned. So we're kind of like cleaning up the car accident.
Yep.
And then, so we don't want there to be stagnant inflammation. We want to open up the gates of flow to allow the inflammation to go, do its job, and then get out. And now new blood to come in, do its job, get out. So we want to keep it cycling through. We just don't want it to become stagnant.
And this is where the understanding of our fascia system really comes into play, because if we're not breathing diaphragmatically, we are not driving these fluids through the body properly, or the energy through the body properly. So breathing through the muscles of the upper chest, again, it's like it's like starting the car in -30 in Winnipeg in the winter. It takes a long time to heat up. We want the body to always be in its highest state of availability for potential healing. So when we're diaphragmatic breathers, we have that. And that's the nice thing, because if somebody comes in and let's say they've broken their ankle, you can still teach people to access proper diaphragmatic breathing, and that turns them into a more efficient healing machine. Because remember, blood is always flowing through our body, obviously, but when it gets directed to a certain area, it's because more is necessary to deal with. Just like if we have an issue in our business and there's suddenly, something crazy that happens, like the site goes down, it's like everything gets diverted to go and fix the problem.
Right.
So when the body's injured, things are going to get diverted to go and fix the problem. And if it doesn't get fixed, then we end up in this chronic state. And the thing is too, if we're not diaphragmatic breathers, we are riddled with adhesions. So again, talking about the ankle, I'm going to have adhesions all the way through my pelvis, my legs. So there's going to be this general slow flow anyway in the body. So then if you do have this injury and your body isn't a healing machine that we're actually designed to be, then there's no repair really happening. So we get this inflammation sent, but now we're icing it. We're not putting any activity. So there's no healing taking place. So the body's still saying, well, wait, there's more to do. There's more to do. There's more to do. So it keeps sending more and more and more. And if we are this frozen body, it just keeps accumulating.
Right.
And then it settles. It starts to become acidic because, like anything where there's a lack of flow, things start to change. It becomes acidic, and then that actually creates more cellular damage. So I truly believe in the beginning, it was because people were trained to become afraid of pain that we started approaching the body in this way, as opposed to, if I sprain it, walk it off. I mean, that used to be something we used to do, like especially for these high level athletes, right? Like, oh, I'm not going to let a little sprain stop me from playing this game, right? So like the athlete, I think intuitively maybe understand better how to deal with those pains in the moment, where typically people, an average 50-year-old man or woman that might sprain their ankle, like they're not inclined to say, I'm going to just walk through it and deal with this. But the thing is, if we keep putting that energy in, then it heals very quickly. So back to your sprain or broken ankle.
Yeah, so it was funny because it was a pretty severe injury right when it happened. So I broke the fibula in 7 or 8 places, the tibia in about 3 or 4. And then, of course, there was torn everything going on in there. So first thing, rushed to the hospital. They had to pop it back into place, my tibia. And then, long story short, I got surgery. The day I got out of surgery, Deanna came over. And this was when I was around, was it 14?
15, something like that.
Yeah. We always forget. But Deanna ended up coming over, and I already believed fully in Deanna's techniques and what she was doing. So
also, the day before, I remember in the hospital, you were working, and I came to the hospital, and I think we worked on your thigh. Just to
I was
make
on
sure.
so much morphine, I don't remember none of that.
Yeah, just because we wanted to get the flow into that space. So
Right.
that's the cool thing too. Even if like you're in that area, you can still promote flow.
Absolutely.
So we did that the day before your surgery.
Okay, so that's all. That is also huge.
Yeah.
And that would have been a massive benefit because it's so important to do it right then in the moment. So I got surgery. I got 3 pins in. I had a phenomenal surgeon. And as these pins were in, I was casted up, got home. Deanna came over immediately. And then she started working on my thigh, so above the cast, and then on my foot a bit, I think.
Through the cast. Like I just putting some pressure in.
Right. So, which is like really cool. And you worked on that for quite some time. And then this was something that just completely threw me off because this is where I'm like, hey, Deanna, you're insane. This is a little next level here. I'm like, I just shattered my ankle. 2 days later, I have pins in. I'm at home and Deanna's like, okay, well, how about you stand up and just slowly start applying pressure onto your broken foot? And I'm like, yeah, is this a joke? But you were serious. And I'm like, okay, so why? So you explain like the pressure is healing. The pressure can help with the pain and it's going to help send more blood oxygen flow. It's also going to help kind of seal everything together a bit more. So completely trusted the process, slowly started applying pressure onto onto my broken ankle. And
through
then
the cast.
Through the cast, yeah. Like I was standing.
Yeah.
And then initially I'm like, wow, this is painful. But as you stay there and you connect to your breath, you feel the pain starts to dissipate a bit, which is a really cool sensation because that's the same with doing block therapy. It's like you start laying on the block, you're like, wow, this is painful. But as you connect to your breath and allow the pressure fibers to override the pain fibers, you don't feel that same pain as much. So it's the same idea with my foot. And then I was expected to be in this cast for 3 months or so. I was in a walking boot within 4 weeks. So obviously I was young, so that's an advantage, but still, that was incredible how fast I healed. And you came over quite a bit to keep working on my thigh, my foot, doing these protocols, and it just heals quick. And sure, there's so many different kinds of injuries that you can experience, but really an injury is an injury. And I remember you told me that a long time ago. It's like your body doesn't really know the difference.
Yeah.
Again, we'll just name it. Like, sure, if you have a shattered ankle, you should probably do something like get medical attention. But if you sprain your wrist,
yeah. And again, like it's not that we don't want people to get medical attention. It's how do we, as our own physical being, keep our body in the best possible state for the most efficient healing. And, like it was really cool because the first time outside of my own self, I've basically tested everything on my own body with how this process happens. But the first time I tested something different than what I was trained as an athletic therapist was with my mom. I was working in a clinic and she came in right off the golf course and she likely had a pretty severe 2nd-degree ankle sprain. So she comes in right off the golf course, traditionally, I would have put ice on that, right? So she's sitting there and I'm like, okay, it's my mom. So I'm going to test the waters here with her a little bit. So I, get her to breathe. I start working on the leg. I work down to the site and her ankle was like quite swollen. So I just initially started applying some nice direct pressure.
And when was this, sorry?
This was, oh my gosh. This
Like
was when I had
how old were you?
I would have been in my early 30s at the time.
Okay, so this is like very new to fluid isometrics.
Yes, this was my first experience working on a degree of that magnitude in a way that, this is probably
against the typical protocol.
Right, like the first year or two into this journey for myself.
Wow.
So working on her ankle. So I'm putting pressure. And then I just said, within the range that you're comfortable, go through some ranges of motion just so I can see. And so I'm holding her foot and she was like, whatever, but she was breathing and I wouldn't push her past her limit with her breath. So then before minutes only, now I've got my fingers right where that injury is. So I'm putting more pressure and she's moving it around. And 15, 20 minutes later, after working right in that space, I had her stand up. She stands up, she puts weight on it. At first she's scared, she's tentative, but then she starts putting pressure on it. And then it's like, okay, she can do that. So then I'm like, can you lift up the other foot? So we go in these very slow grades to make sure there's a feeling of safety. And then it's like, okay, I'm holding her hands now. I said take a step. And with that exhale, push off from that sore foot. So I'm supporting her. And then she was able to do it. And then I let go of one of her hands and she's doing it. And then before you know it, she's walking. So she went home that night. And I knew she was going to be really sore the next day because there's healing, right? So especially when we sleep, the body still continues with the healing, but there's really no movement in the body. So then it starts to build up. So generally we wake up in the morning, now it's going to be really stiff. So I reminded her, it's going to be sore and stiff the next morning, but I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to work on it. So I get there the next morning and I said, so how did it feel? And she's like, well, I was in quite a bit of pain last night, but when you think of it, whatever goes into the body has to come out. So all of that pain that basically was put into the body from that damage, it was leaving through the night. So by the time I had finished with her the second day, she was already 70% better.
Yeah,
and this was
insane.
like a decent 2nd-degree ankle sprain that would have taken weeks and weeks and weeks traditionally. So what was so exciting was because of this experience I had with her, this was my first experience working in this manner on a fracture. So I had my clinic, and this young guy, 18 years old, his name was John. He was a provincial rugby player, and he had he had a really bad 4th metatarsal fracture. So he was the captain of the team, and they were supposed to be playing finals in 3 weeks from the time of his injury. He was told not to weight bear for 4 weeks. I met him on day 6 after his injury. So he comes in, we give him his initial treatment, send him home. Already he had improvement and everything, send him home the next day. And we've got videos of this on our YouTube channel.
This is literally on our YouTube channel that people can see.
Yeah. So what was so cool was the next day, he comes in, and again, I take him through the protocol of working through the breath down the leg, then I get to his foot. So what was really neat was if you try pushing on somebody that's sore, they're going to be scared. So right off the hop, they're going to start guarding themselves and holding their breath. So I said, okay, so John, I said, I'm just going to put my hand here. So I'm just a wall. I want you to push your foot in with your breath. So you're in full control of the movement. If you can't do it, fair enough. But if you can, so it wasn't more than minutes. And he's like, I'm actually having to really fight this pressure. So I'm like, okay, let's see what happens when you stand up. So similar to my mom, I had him stand up, put the weight down. Okay, so let's just go with the breath, see what happens. He played in 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's...
And again, you can see the video. I mean, it was fascinating. So I saw him 4 times in that period of time, and he played in 3 weeks. And we had him jumping back and forth.
Yep.
And then that prompted a soccer player from New York to come in similar scenario. We saw him he had a Jones fracture, which is on the 5th metatarsal. And he arrived in Winnipeg 3 weeks after. He was told to stay in his boot for 6 weeks, and that he may need to have that bone, have a rod put in, because it's such a fragile bone because it's really literally the furthest from the engine. So it fractures easily. So he came in the walking boot. By day 2, we show him bounding on both feet with no pain. And he didn't, the funny thing was, is he didn't even bring another shoe. So we had to go to the mall to buy a pair of shoes because he brought the walking boot and one shoe only.
That's
so
hilarious.
Yeah, it was awesome. So those were like the first 2 experiences dealing with fractures. And again, like just completely changed the game of what was necessary for the amount of healing time. And it doesn't matter if it's a fracture, if it's a torn ligament, or tendon or muscle or whatever it is. It's all based on the second law of thermodynamics. Nature abhors a gradient. So when there's a gap in the system, nature's going to fill in that gap. If we don't rebuild the area properly, it gets filled in with scar tissue. And then if the scar tissue becomes the prominent tissue, now we have areas of the body that are barricades to blood and oxygen flow.
And scar tissue is just connective tissue. It's our fascia system.
Collagen, basically. Yeah.
So why did it go in and why does the fascia go in there and fill in that gap?
It's the second law of, it's the laws of nature.
Rather than like muscle tissue or fat, or is this just a silly question?
It's the yeah, I'm not sure how to answer it, actually.
So I'm getting like way too technical on something we don't even.
Yeah, like I'm not a detail person, so like I'm not. I see how the body responds. So again, like it's going to get filled in. It's not going to get filled in with muscle first of all, because if it's filling in, it's immobilized.
Right.
So it's just
muscle has its structure on what it's going to do. It's not morphing and migrating like our connective tissue. So that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So I remember another injury that was a little bit more recent. This was with my hand. And this is my first time applying this to myself, because you applied the ankle injury, and then I saw the videos that you've done, and then I'm just taking your knowledge and then utilizing this for myself. So I won't explain the reason as to what happened to my hand here, but both of these knuckles kind of disappeared, and then there's a mountain over my hand. So again, I didn't get it checked out, so I don't know if it was broken or dislocated or what exactly happened, but there's a mountain in my hand. I'm like, this isn't good. So right away, I just kind of put my hand on my knee. I just popped it back in, started moving my hand right away. I got home, and then I just continued this process, moving it. Then I started blocking my forearm and then blocking my shoulder just to improve as much flow as I can to get to my hand, because also the hand's pretty far away from the engine as well. And then it was 4 days later, you and I had to work on people. Mm-hmm. And this was hilarious because I'm like, what do I do? I'm like, my hand is so swollen, but I'm moving it. I'm applying pressure. I'm following the protocol. And then within 4 days, I was working on people. And this was with like, it was pretty bad. It looked pretty bad. And it was amazing how fast it heals, because if I went to get that checked out, I would have been in a cast. They would have casted up my hand, I think. And that could have been a 4, 6, 8 week process.
And I think we have to recognize that we aren't this solid structure with parts. If you have a mindset of that, then this information can seem scary, because it's like, well, if I break my bone and I don't give it time to fuse back together and heal, you know, what's going to happen? But if you understand that your body is this fluid matrix, and we have this capacity to become more like water through that flow, then magnetically things want to, you know, come back together. I remember years ago when I was meditating, working on my own body, I had this vision of how a spinal cord injury could come back together, because I was really understanding the fact that we are these magnetic beings, and cells want to be in their home. Our bodies want to be healthy. The body wants to be a diaphragmatic breather.
Remove the barriers.
Yeah, like we've just gotten so far away from our natural state of balance and being that we've had to create these stories around what is actually true for the, you know, the level of perspective that we have on what our bodies are capable of. Our bodies are capable of so much more than we give them credit. The first time actually I really understood this was I was working on this 3-year-old little girl who had spina bifida. She was paralyzed from the waist down, and her ankle, like she was so twisted in her body, her lateral malleolus, that outer ankle part, was actually touching her leg. Like that's how twisted she was.
Yeah.
So I was going there and I was working on her, and she's sitting watching TV as I'm working, and she can't feel anything. And I am griefing on her. Like I'm not holding back. I'm very aware of her breath. I'm watching what's going on and I'm feeling things, but I'm thinking, holy smokes, like I'm being more physical with her than I would be even like you, for example. And I'm seeing that she's, laughing, watching TV. And it just really struck home for me in that moment that pain is the limiting factor to everything, because pain directs how we approach things. If we have a different relationship with pain, the way that we can approach our bodies is so incredibly different than if we think pain is the enemy. Pain is not the bully. It is not at all. Adhesions are, if we want to look at it that way. Adhesions and scar tissue are the problem. Pain is our best friend if we know what to do with it, because it gives us the most direct route to going from where we are to where we want to be, which is flow, balance, symmetry. That's where we want to be. Pain is what takes us away from that. Because again, let's say I've got a perfectly aligned body and I'm golfing and then I tweak something and I want to still golf. Well, I'm just going to posturally shift so I can still do it. So that becomes my new alignment. And now this becomes my posture and my habit. And if I don't correct that, then there's going to be some other compensation that's going to pull me and start to wind me down. And the fascia is designed to create both stability and mobility. So if we lose mobility because we're stabilizing to guard ourselves, then over time, the mobility is lost to the stability. The stability means more we're frozen. And when we're more frozen, we have less flow. And if we have less flow, then we're allowing gravity to really dictate how we age.
You can have stability and mobility in a positive way, though, with the fascia system, right?
Absolutely. And that's how we should be.
That's the goal.
That's the goal, when there's this nice balance of the collagen and the elastin. Just like, again, like I always refer to the building, just like the building, we have to have solid floors, walls, ceilings, windows in order for everything awesome to happen inside the space. So minus 30 in here, if it window breaks and you don't have an ability to heat yourself, you can die inside your space from cold. So it's the structure that needs to be considered in order to allow the most mobility possible. If we lose the structure, then there's more structure being created in an unconscious way. Those are those false walls and false floors. Because if I start tipping off balance and I'm not conscious of using my body properly and strengthening those proper foundations, then the body's going to compensate and build all of these additional supports that eventually cause us to become denser. And again, if we're unconscious, which tends to be the way, then it continues to wind us down over time. And that's aging as we know it today, because we're all afflicted. I mean, we'll all have injury, we'll all have stress and trauma at some point in our lives, for some more than others, but either way, we're all human. Right. And we're all constantly being impeded by gravity. So understanding how to create that balance of stability and mobility is the key, and it's completely doable if we truly understand, just simply how to support our fascia structure.
I could ask you, how do we support our fascia structure, but that could just be a kind of a long, drawn out process there. But initially,
well, it's fascia decompression. Like it really comes down to that. It's cellular alignment.
The three pillars, really.
Yeah.
So, and I believe in our first podcast, in the first episode, we talked a lot about that. So if you want to check that out, I don't really know how to ask this question, but let's say you have a highly sensitive person to pain, where like they're sensitive to the touch kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then somebody who is like paralyzed, the total extreme opposite. So you're saying that you can work on that girl whose foot was bent laterally all the way to pretty well touching her fibula, right?
Yeah.
And you can rip it apart harder than you would be working on me, and I can take a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Is there, like, what is the threshold where you should say this is too much? Where you are kind of in like the happy medium. So let's say now I'm in the happy medium, let's call it. where is it at the point where I'm like, this is too much? Because if pain is just pretty much the barrier to prevent us from making progress in a way, because we're just saying like, oh, I'm scared of it, I want to shy away. But once you start accepting it, what is the threshold of where you're almost accepting it too much? You've turned this pain signal off, and that you could actually create injury. Can you get to that point?
Well, some people actually have, I don't know what the term is called, where they don't actually feel pain.
And you know what? I experienced that. It was one of my very first block therapy classes. I was 18 years old, and I was teaching out of like a community center or something. And this lady, as I'm instructing the process in the class, she's like, I don't feel pain. And I'm like, okay. And it was like every position. She like didn't feel pain. I'm like, what do you mean you don't feel pain? Like, do you feel anything? She's like, no. Like, I'm like, okay. And that's where I was like kind of stuck. I'm like, what do I do in this situation? So what is that even?
Again, well, for that individual, I'm not sure, but I mean, there's an actual condition where some people don't sense pain, period.
Weird.
And I remember it was probably 30 years ago. I was watching. That's kind of
terrifying.
I think it was an Oprah Winfrey show, and it was this little girl, and she didn't feel pain, and like everybody's like, "Oh my God, that would be amazing." It's not amazing because again, pain is a signal. So again, if I've got my hand on a hot element, I want to be aware that I'm like actually creating damage
100%.
to the tissue. Conversely, working on somebody that doesn't feel pain, you're not going in with an intention to harm. And you're not going in with an intention to like burn. But if you're working in a body that doesn't actually have sensation, the forces of nature that act on us all the time are so incredible. I mean, gravity constantly pulling us down, this 2,000 pound per square inch seal that's holding us out of alignment. We have so much internal tension that we're not even aware of because it's constant. Just like we're not aware of gravity. We see
100%.
Gravity as we get older, and it's like, okay, I'm seeing the changes from gravity, but we don't really feel gravity. Otherwise, we'd be levitating, right? Without gravity. So again, when we're working on somebody from that perspective, like I don't feel there's really anything that we can do that would be harmful to that person, because again, we're not going in with an intention to harm. And I do believe too, if somebody is paralyzed and something's happening to their body that isn't necessarily consciously felt but not positive, you would see that response because the body is so intelligent. It is far more intelligent than our brain is. We have created stories around scenarios to give us a way to handle and deal with situations. But if we get out of the way, the body knows how to heal itself. We are usually the ones
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
And we're usually the ones that get in the way of the actual healing because we're afraid. And I mean, I understand, like it's not like the body can't do crazy things, like these healing crises that we can have, suddenly somebody has like a full body rash. They're like, holy smokes, like what just happened? It's like, well, all of that stuff was inside you. So if it's now coming out, that's a good thing, because if it's inside
Absolutely.
you, it's affecting you in a negative way. It might not feel very nice on the way out, but I would rather have it not be in me and have it out of me and go through that period of time, short or long as it is, to release it from my body so that I know that I'm cleaner inside. So it's this sense that like we're so sterile these days, like with everything, like, make sure that you don't touch anybody, or if somebody sneezed, like, get away from me, like all of these things. Our body is designed to have an immune system that can handle pretty much anything if we allow it to. We've gotten in the way of that, not the body. God created us to be absolutely these phenomenal humans that have, again, a greater capacity than what we even understand that we do. And I don't even understand it yet. And I know there's more information always coming out about, how much more we can be. So I'm excited to see where the next few decades go, because I think there's going to be so many additional healing modalities and scientific research. Greg Braden's doing a lot of amazing stuff, sharing just like the potential that we as humans can have. And we'll see where things go. But I know that if we can trust the body, trust the innate intelligence, trust the breath, understand pain for the language and the information that it gives us, that's all it is. It's giving us information.
Wow, that's a lot of information in general when it just comes to pain and acute pain. So you mentioned earlier that acute pain is how chronic pain pretty well initiates. So
It's one of the major ways, yes.
One of the major ways. Okay. So let's talk about chronic pain, because this acute pain is one thing. And I would prefer acute pain over chronic pain almost any day. It's like, okay, I understand what it is. I understand how it happened. There's a there's a pretty simple protocol to get out of it, as long as you can just accept that this is the fact that, okay, it's going to be painful for this next hour, however long, not that long. But chronic pain is where it gets spooky, because why am I in chronic back pain? How did this develop? How do we get out? Do I work on my back? Do I just rub the muscles? Do I use heat? Like do I do acupuncture? Do I do a spinal decompression? Like, what do I do to get out? And then some people go to that nth degree of getting surgery done. So what is chronic pain?
So our body has an incredible ability to adapt. So take that person with that sprained ankle. Let's say you're 15 years old. You've fractured your ankle, you're 15. You deal with it the traditional way. Now you've got scar tissue. And that scar tissue is going to take away the optimal mechanics of how that foot works. So now over your lifetime, let's say it's 10, 20, 30 years later, all of the compensations that your body naturally undergoes because you don't have that normal gait is creating a shifting of how your body is positioned. So we adapt. Again, we do it unconsciously. We're not even aware, oh, I got a blister on my toe. I'm just going to shift the way that I walk so I don't. And then if, like it's amazing how quickly these patterns get implemented into our being. So 20, 30 years later, you wake up and you're like, holy smokes, my back just went out and I didn't do anything. I just woke up and I can't walk. We finally, it all comes down to space. When there's enough space to change, we can change. Finally, you get to that place where, remember the mobility, stability balance, where there's no more mobility left and there's only stability. We're just frozen. So now I get up and I try to move, and I try to move in a way that my body doesn't have any space to move anymore. And it's like, whoa, now you've got some pain. So typically, chronic pain is going to occur on the opposite side of the body compared to what's driving it. So let's say you sprain your right ankle. Now you've got this pronation lifelong. The left side of your body is going to be under this constant stress, because as your body gets pulled away from balance, the other side is going to have to anchor itself. Over time, this creates a lot of tension. In one of the other discussions we did, we talked about the potential versus the kinetic energy. So there's all this potential energy because we're falling into this space, but now the back of the body is having to constantly fire and handle that collapsing. So all of the energy in the back of that left side of the body is going to get used up very quickly because it's having to work 24/7 pretty much, as opposed to only when we want to use it. So there's very little rest. Even when we're lying down and sleeping, these forces that are created in the body when we're even not moving, they're still present. The body's still trying to find balance. Those cells are still wanting to be home, but the further they get pulled away from home, the less energy they're going to have in the equal and opposite side of the body to handle all of that stress. So then you wake up and you're exhausted. There's also not a lot of energy back there. So if I'm collapsing and I keep getting pulled over and over to the right, now think of all of the structures inside. Everything is getting impacted. It's not just the muscles. Now your spine is starting to twist over, and the vertebrae, the space between them, they're starting to get manipulated. So now you're getting stress on the discs. They get shot to the back. They put pressure on the nerves. Now you might have sciatic pain, or you might have a herniated disc, or this might create spondylolisthesis, where like you have instability in the spinous process. So really, it doesn't matter what the actual diagnosis is inside. We want to know what's causing it, because we can go in and we can like attempt to fix it, but if we don't take away that cause, you're going to end up probably with a surgery if you have those instabilities, where we can rebuild, but we have to take away that driving force. So again, that's where understanding the full expression of our body and looking at every cell and where are things, what are those anchors? Like if you were to walk around for a month carrying a 20-pound weight in your right arm only, and you did it like your waking hours all the time, you're going to be pretty out of balance in a month.
Almost within a day.
Right, exactly. So this is kind of the scenario, what's happening to everybody. I mean, I look at pictures of people multiple times a day, And the first thing I do is what's the flat tire and what's the anchor side? And then you got to bring that into balance.
I was going to say, for me, at least there's some sort of trail that I could look back at saying like, okay, I had an ankle injury. Okay, the connective tissue is definitely gripped and adhered onto all of these ways that I haven't been able to create that mobility within the ankle. So the knee joint's like, wait, now you're not articulating properly. So let's grip and adhere onto here to prevent you from twisting more out of alignment. But now that causes a compensation with the hip and then the low back, the spine, the shoulder, the head, the neck. So for me, I actually have some sort of trail to look back on. So for people, and I think you're just kind of getting there, who have back pain and they don't really know the cause, like maybe they didn't have any injuries, like maybe it was just poor posture, or they just weren't performing things correctly. That's almost a little spookier in a way because they don't really know the cause. So what would be the first area that you would address if somebody comes to you or somebody just reaches out to you in our community saying like, I have chronic back pain, no idea how this happened. A couple of years ago, I started feeling some aches, but now it's like debilitating. I'm in pain literally all day. Yeah. Where would you, like, what would be the first protocol and where would you tell them to start working and focusing on?
That's a great question. And that's why our starter program is designed the way that it is, because the very, very first thing, no matter what, we want to teach people how to breathe. So we start in the core and the ribs, always. We always want to turn on that breath, because until we can create that internal heating, then we're frozen. So if you come in with a sprained ankle and I work on your ankle and you're frozen everywhere else, you might feel good for a moment walking out, but you start walking, that lack of blood flow, all of those adhesions, that's going to be impacting your ability to heal. As soon as we turn on that internal mechanism, the diaphragm, we start heating up the body, absorbing more oxygen, moving the waste more freely out of the body. So right away, we're turning on this part of the body to create that heating. Then I would go to the foundation. So our starter program is designed in that way. So no matter what people are dealing with, we want to make sure that we're approaching things properly. Once we've opened up the body, and we've created flow throughout in general, then I would focus foundation and really make the foundation a big focus. Because even if you have a frozen shoulder, if I have a right frozen shoulder, my left foot, and I'm speaking generally because there's always exceptions to every rule, but typically, again, that left foot's going to be the flat tire driving my body into that system, creating an immobilization through here. Mm-hmm. So if I work up here and I don't correct that left foot,
up here by your shoulder?
By my shoulder, yeah. Yep. Like where the actual pain is, then I'm not going to get rid of the cause site. So we always talk about pain sites and cause sites. So we got to look at those cause sites. And the limbs, the forearms and the hands, the calves and the feet, these are the furthest from the engine, the diaphragm. So because fascia literally freezes or magnetically seals onto bone, where they are the furthest from the heat source is where they are going to be the most chaotic and the most impacted. So if I don't release that, again, I can work through my core, but then my arms can pull me back into that negative alignment that will directly affect my rib cage, that will affect my breath. And what I'm really seeing today with babies is because the mothers of today grew up in front of computers. Unlike my generation, I'm 54, so I mean, I didn't even really know of computers until I was, teenager or older, but I mean, now kids are growing up in front of them. So the mothers of today who grew up in this contracted alignment because of technology, they have so little space and they already have such a compromised breath. And in yoga, they talk about we're born with a signature posture. The goal of this lifetime is to break through that signature posture. The way I see that expression is we are born in this lifetime with our mother's breath. So if you had a mom that was really calm and healthy and supported in her life and during this pregnancy, you're going to come out with that calm, lovely breath. Conversely, if you have a mother who's hyper-stressed, which is pretty much most people today, contracted and twisted, you're going to come out in that way with that breath, and then life pummels you from that point going forward. So a lot of these things are happening in the womb and how we come out with the breath, because if we don't have a diaphragm...
It's not even the baby's fault, or as bad as that sounds.
No. No, and I mean, it's nobody's fault. It's it's the understanding of what's causing what. And it's not like there's an intention behind this. It's simply an unconscious
For sure.
awareness of really putting the time and the focus. And I mean, there's a ton of reasons for it. I mean, we're a convenience world. It doesn't suit people to rest. That whole concept of, I just want to go, I want to do, I want to get as much accomplished. That mindset has taken us away from what's really necessary. We need to feed our soul. And if we do, we can be really, really effective in this world. But if we're exhausted, we can't be. We're just going to be running after things. I remember this one time. Here's just a silly little example of what rushing does. I was rushing in this morning. I was late. I was rushing, and I'm rarely late. I'm usually early. So I was stressed about rushing, but I hadn't eaten anything. I was hungry. So I reached inside of my fridge to grab this jar of applesauce, and I'm moving too quickly and it shatters on my floor. And now I have applesauce spraying all over my floor and my counters. And if you can imagine the sticky mess, I probably added at least an hour to just simply clean up this mess because I was rushing. Had I just slowed myself down and, been conscious of what I was doing, that wouldn't have happened. So because we're in this world that's so full of distraction and rushing, and we're all so in our head, we're very far out of our body. And we need to get back to being inside of our body to really understand the language of the cell. And pain is a language, and it's a very important language. There's also other, sensations, anxiety, that sense of an anxious cell.
Is anxiety a form of pain?
I absolutely believe it is, because essentially anxiety happens when your cell isn't getting what it needs, so it's giving you a signal. So, for me, that's more in the forefront for me is anxiety than pain. Pain to me is, I love pain for the value that it gives, and because we have an approach to work with it. So I don't see pain as this like big, huge thing that I want to prevent. If it happens, it's because it needs to happen, because I need to become aware of something, and now I have a process to deal with it.
And what's super interesting, there's times where definitely myself, I'll say we will experience pain. And like quite a bit of pain. Like I'm still working through bodybuilding injuries. Like I've kinked my neck over the past few years, and I can't believe the pain. There's been times where I've been extremely sick, and I've had my full body riddled with aches and pains where I can't even breathe, and I'm like curled up into a ball, and I'm like, I didn't even know this much pain even existed. Like how can somebody feel this much pain? But anyways, point being is, let's say I kink my neck, or my low back is hurting from whatever I'm doing, or just being me. In that moment, it's not great. There's times, again, the kink neck can be one of the worst because I can't move my head left to right. It's like all of the connective tissue and muscles are trying to create the stability, and there's so much inflammation. So I feel it in my shoulder, I feel it in my back, in all these different areas, all the way up into my occipital bone. And I'm like, oh my God, it's just constant. So then, of course, if I can, I get to the block, or I'll have you over if I have to stay upright, and I'll just start ripping it apart. But then it's once I get on that other side of it, that's when I have that aha moment. I'm like, some people live with chronic pain for years. I had it for a few days. How can people live like that? And then that just brings all this gratitude to me, saying, oh my God, I'm so thankful I don't have this chronic pain. And if I do, I have a protocol, and I know I can get out of it. Because so many people don't know if they can. They're like, I've tried everything out there, and I can't get out of pain. And that's obviously extremely terrifying, but it makes me extremely grateful. But then it creates that relatability between us and our community. Yeah. Because when somebody comes in, and but they join the program, or they're just reaching out in the Facebook group, hey, like I've had this chronic pain for this amount of years, or I've had this acute pain, but now it's just not going away, and it's been like months and months. At least I can now understand, because typically I don't have much pain in my body. And
I think one of the big challenges that what we're just seeing is how people prescribe painkillers. So, okay, I've injured my knee, and I'm a runner, and I love running. So, when I take that Advil, I can actually run. So that's a problem, because that numbing of the pain is blocking the sensation. So we've learned to numb ourselves from the sensations. So now I'm running on a joint that otherwise I wouldn't be running on if I didn't have this painkiller, because I want to run. Instead of saying, okay, I want to heal and I want to rebuild this and I'm going to do what I have to do so that I can run, I mask the pain so that I can keep running. Because the other positive effects of running, the endorphin release, or let's say running is my way to, manage my size and shape, and that's a big thing.
To it.
Right. So these painkillers become a huge problem because now we're killing that pain signal. So we're creating more and more and more and more damage continually until those painkillers don't work. And that's when, okay, now you've got like a really degenerated joint, because the pain was here to give you information. And now you've said, no, I don't want that information, but it's going to keep going,
Absolutely.
Whether you're numbing it or not, those signals are there. If you're numbing them, you're not hearing them. So again, if you ignored the baby crying for 5 days, your baby's going to be dead. Like, bottom line, like you've got to look after things, and this body, we can't replace it. I mean, you can get a knee replacement or a hip replacement, but literally you can't replace your body. You can buy a new car, whatever, but this thing that we take for granted is something that we should be revering so much. And I mean, we're all human, and one of the craziest things is how much we hate ourselves for how we look, or if we're not perfect, or if my belly's bigger than I want, or I've got some cellulite, like this dialogue that we have around what our body looks like, or if it's not functioning well. Like, if you think of a sick baby, you're not going to be cruel. You're going to give it love and attention, and you're going to be there until it's well. And if we look at our body with that much compassion and love and forgiveness, then the capacity to heal and have a lifelong awesome experience is so much better than if we're like, okay, you know what, right now okay, so let's even like, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I was 50 pounds overweight, and all I wanted to do was be skinny. Like, it's interesting, the mindsets, right? Because like, looking back, I think how crazy it was. Like, I literally abused myself daily. I had eating disorders. I was an absolute mess. And for the sake of, in that moment, maybe having that one guy think I was attractive or whatever, not even considering, well, what's that going to be like for you when you're 40, 50, 60, 70, 80? Like, we're so caught up in the moment, as opposed to looking at this beautiful body that we have that is here for our entire life. Like, we're so caught up in that vanity aspect of things.
Beauty is also just a perception. Like,
yeah.
Everybody, like, I find... how do I word this without saying the wrong thing? But people will find all different kinds of people attractive. That's the point. And that's it. But everybody's so caught up in the Kardashian look, or having to follow like this protocol to look a certain way, that it just makes no sense. Like, it really doesn't. Why do we want everybody to look the same then?
Well, and really, we all have like body size and shape, we all have what is ideal for us specifically. Like, it wouldn't be ideal for me to weigh 90 pounds. I'm 5'8", like I've got like a bigger structure. Somebody else, it might be ideal to weigh this. But if I'm like, you know what, I want to weigh 120 pounds no matter what. Like, just because otherwise I'm thinking that, like, I don't want to say I'm 140 pounds or something. Then we end up doing things that go against our nature. Some people might be great at that weight. Some people, that's not a healthy weight. So same as everything, like, we all have this potential for the most beautiful version of ourselves compared to, I don't want to use the word ugly, because I'm like, let's talk about symmetry and balance and asymmetry and congestion. So that's how I kind of view beauty. If my cells are aligned, if they're all being properly fed and clean, then that is the most beautiful version that you can be. Right. Because you have that connection to your cells. You have your body's clean, it's being fed, you're at rest, you're balanced, and your systems are functioning as well as they possibly can be. It's when we go in that other direction and we have these cells getting pulled away, we become asymmetrical. There's beauty in asymmetry, but I mean, if you look at a butterfly and one of its wings isn't balanced, or you look at the Charlie Brown Christmas tree, it's about symmetry. So when we have symmetry, then we have the potential to have ourselves at home in their most relaxed, healthy state. And that's what we want.
So let's tie this into the emotional pain as well. So we talked about acute pain, we talked about chronic pain. And then, because I never really understood this until I did block therapy. And maybe I did, but I just didn't really connect the dots. But there's different areas where I would be blocking and different kind of sensations or emotions would surface. And I found that weird. But you also did mention that, like, as you were teaching, and I came to some of the first classes you were teaching. And I remember when I was working on the right rib cage, right above the liver or right around the liver, I was feeling a pain where I wanted to punch a hole through the floor. And I was like angry. I'm like, I don't want to be in this. I just like, get me out. I'm angry. But then there's other areas that I'm working with where I felt almost the opposite in a way. Like it kind of just felt like sad. And I'm just like, well, it was weird. And I didn't really understand why that was happening. So I don't know if I'm tying this in the correct way to this emotional pain, but that's at least how I understood it to an extent. But how would you define emotional pain?
So emotion is energy in motion. So through our lives, pain, fear, and stress will cause us to reactively hold the breath. So as an example, let's say every day I come home and let's just say I have an abusive father. And I'm always scared when I come home that I'm going to get yelled at. I'm going to learn to guard myself because we're these vulnerable beings inside, right? I mean, we all have, this feeling of wanting to be fully loved and supported and accepted for who we are. But if we have abuse in any way, shape, or form, and even scenarios that aren't considered abusive, that might not allow you to be your fullest expressive self, you learn to shut down parts of yourself. So if, boys shouldn't cry, girls shouldn't get angry. Well, you know what? What if you need to bawl your eyes out because you're really, really sad or you've really hurt yourself and you're not allowed to cry?
Releasing the emotion.
Well, and here's a great example. I remember I was 3 years old and we were camping and we had a bonfire on the beach the night before. And so it's the next morning. And I remember I go down and all the people were up at the campsite and I'm just like running around on the beach. And here's the area where the bonfire was. And I go and I sat in it. Like I'm thinking.
You sat in a fire?
Well, it was the next morning. So it was out.
Oh, I see.
But like I mean, like, how like cats like being in boxes, whatever. So I go and I sit in this little thing. Thank God I didn't burn my butt. But when I stood up, I put my foot on a hot coal that was still burning from the night before. I remember this so vividly. I literally shrilled in pain. I ended up with a 3rd-degree burn on my arch. Jeez. But so I remember my mom coming down and grabbing me, and I am just wailing, wailing, wailing. So she plops me on my dad's lap. And, I totally understand my dad's response to this because I'm not really good with like crazy energy like that. But now I'm on his lap and I'm wailing in pain, and he doesn't know what to do with this. So he's like, he hands me a chocolate bar and tells me to like, be quiet. Here you go, have a chocolate bar, be quiet. So it was kind of like, stop crying, here's sugar to soothe you. So I see how that created a very specific emotional response for me. Like whenever I'm in pain, let's eat sugar. Right? Like these are the things that we learn and that teach us.
You don't think of that.
Yeah, so like these things get stuck and stored in us if we aren't allowed to express in the moment. Like a baby's gonna cry. If the baby wants to cry, you can't say, stop crying, baby, and it's gonna stop crying. It's gonna stop crying when it chooses to, whenever its needs are met or whatever.
The emotion is released.
Yeah, but as we get up and we get conditioned to be certain ways, or, you know what, Deanna, you're a girl, you shouldn't be getting angry. Well, I want to get angry because I'm angry. Like, this doesn't feel right. But if I'm not allowed to express that emotion, it's going to get stored. And then the more I learn to shut up, the more now I'm clenching and I'm contracting because I want to scream, but yet I can't. There's unfairness in the world. So we hold it in. And like when we're doing work in through here, it's amazing the releases people can have here because how many times have we not said what we want to say? I mean, me included. I don't like conflict.
Well, and the amount of just expressions that we can provide with our facial structure and the muscles and the connective tissue. You're making all these faces all the time.
Yeah.
And that will probably contribute to them being stored in the face.
Well, and what if somebody says, well, stop looking at me that way? Well, it's like, okay. So then like you get really worried.
That's so true. You just kind of like shrug it, like, wow.
Yeah,
okay,
and that's the body becoming more structured as opposed to being mobile. Like the mobility versus the stability. The more we stop the expressions, the more it gets stuck and stored inside of us. And then you have the person that, you're driving and you get cut off, and oh my gosh, it's like, somebody took a gun to your head, but really somebody just like, cut you off, but you've got all this built up anxiety and anger in you that you explode. And I mean, we can see it. People are doing crazy things in the world because they haven't been allowed to just be their expressive, beautiful, wonderful self. We've been so put in these boxes, and there's so much division. There's a lot of anger. And so this is a beautiful way to learn how to manage that as well, because emotional pain is, in my opinion, far more damaging than the physical pain. People can see physical pain.
Well, emotional pain can cause physical pain.
Absolutely. But even if you don't have the physical pain, like if you're walking and you're limping and there's a visual saying, okay, you're in pain, you're going to get treated that, yes, you have pain. If you're in emotional pain, you might look healthy, your blood work might be fine, but you might be feeling absolutely wretched inside. And people are like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you acting this way? I mean, I deal with that a lot with patients when they, come at us. They're like, I went and nobody can find the cause site of my pain. So then you're told, well, it's in your head. Well, that's not going to help.
And this all ties into trauma.
Yeah.
And the trauma relief program and summit that we hosted, which was incredible. And there's so many different ways of releasing the trauma and the emotional pain. So let's say, from the perspective of block therapy and fascia, what would be an effective way to release emotional pain, or to at least create that disconnect so that we don't get triggered by that all the time? Because I remember you saying, like, I think you were at the mall and then you saw this like older gentleman walking, and then he looked at you a certain way, or not at you, maybe it was nothing to do with you, but you kind of caught that glimpse, and then it made you feel like, oh, like terrible, because it reminded you of how your dad looked at you when he was angry.
Yeah.
So how do we release these ties and these triggers that are causing this? Because it's definitely a mind-body connection that we need to be able to release and let go.
Yeah, and it comes down to the breath again. If our diaphragm is
100%.
Completely free and working properly, all of the stuff coming in gets moved out in the moment. We get cells that are properly fed and clean. We become detoxified. And I mean, toxins can be anything from physical stuff to emotional energy to whatever. So like our body is riddled with negative energy, whether physical or emotional. So we want to free up the areas of the diaphragm that have become frozen from past insult in order that we can release it. And I love it because I believe it was Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now where he said, when we're breathing diaphragmatically, we're living in the moment. When we're breathing through the muscles of the upper chest, we're caught in the past and the future, which is where fear lives, and neither are real. Because yes, you may have had an experience in the past, but you have a perspective of that, which will be different when you approach it from a different perspective, or even how somebody
100%.
else would have seen it. So we get caught up in this. So relating to the story you just shared, so yeah, whenever my dad would look at me with a disappointed look, that was the worst thing, disappointing my dad. That was just one of those emotional things for me. So I'm in a great mood walking through the mall. This man passes me. We lock eyes for the moment, and he gives me that scowl. And I lost my mood. I was like, suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, I felt sick and twisted. But because I was in a process of understanding this, I was like, wait a sec. Perhaps this might not have had anything to do with me. Maybe we, caught glances at the same time when he had a shot of pain somewhere, and he grimaced with his own pain, and it was just coincidence. So why am I making this about me? So as soon as I wrap my head around the fact that, well, this probably isn't even about me. And if it is, who cares? I mean, what does it matter if he looks at me, if he doesn't like my hairstyle or something, who cares? Why should that affect my mood in my day? So the thing with Eckhart Tolle, with what he was saying is, when we're breathing diaphragmatically, we can see each moment as a unique experience. Compared to when we're breathing up here, we get caught in the concepts of memory. And this is where I see how the heart and the brain are so intimately connected. So the heart's pumping to feed blood and oxygen to every cell in the body. When those cells are working, they give signals to the brain. So if we have adhesions blocking that flow, maybe we only have 20 or 30 or 40% of our cells actually receiving energy and information to send to the brain as opposed to 100%. So now there's going to be gaps in the system. So now the brain is going to fill in those gaps. So if I didn't have that...
The brain is going to fill in those gaps. That's interesting.
With memory. So
right.
As an example, if I didn't have that ability to pull myself out of that, the rest of my day, I could have been like, what did I do wrong? Why did I do that? Why did that man look at me that way? And I could have been caught up in that, and that could have completely derailed my day. I might have gone home suddenly insecure as opposed to feeling really good. I might have like been snippy at my family as opposed to being calm. And then that's going to translate to my family responding to my energy and feeling a certain way as well. Like the butterfly effect. You know, it's amazing how they say a butterfly can flap its wings somewhere in Japan and it can create a tornado over here. It's like that. It's like if you smile at someone every day, you're going to lift them up. If you treat them in an unkind way, that's going to beat them up.
Yeah.
And so these things really matter. And it really all does come down to understanding pain, how our bodies work, what we need to do to elevate and to lift each other. And emotionally, it's so important these days because, again, like we are being flogged with negative information all the time. There is much beauty and miracles going on in the world as there are destructive, awful things. What do we focus on? If you focus on the beauty, you're going to see the beauty. And even like with people, if you focus on the beautiful components of the people, you're going to see the beauty in that person. Like most people that are on Instagram with, pictures, like that is a momentary image positioned. It's so not real. So, and then conversely, you start talking to somebody that you might not have been initially attracted to, and you understand through their communication and their heart, and you see them expressive and moving, how beautiful they are. So, beauty is such an interesting concept, but if we choose to see beauty, we're going to see it everywhere. If we choose to see ugly, we're going to see it everywhere.
Wow. Wow, that's some powerful statements. And that's so true because even when I was really focusing on my meditation and being in the moment, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to do either. Like it takes some time, it takes some practice, but the first thing you have to do is focus on the breath. I 100% agree because like I've felt this and I still live this. Like I'm still human. There's days where I'm like, okay, I'm focusing more on the negative than the positive. And there's other days where it's like, wow, just everything's beautiful. Everything's great. And just understanding that that's normal and that can happen. Also having some sort of morning routine to do the belly position, decompress the connective tissue there, activate the diaphragm, breathe properly. That's going to kickstart your day pretty well the best way that you can. Mix that in with some positive, I don't even necessarily am going to say affirmations, but just being grateful for what you have. And regardless of where you are in life, just being grateful for what you have. That combination right there is pretty magical. And I remember when I was focusing on meditating an hour, 2 hours a day, blocking like crazy, eating extremely healthy foods, doing cleanses. It's really hard to see the negative. It's really difficult. And that was like the most beautiful state to be in because you're just optimistic about everything. Everything's in the world is working for you, not against you. And that's like the ultimate goal, at least where I was, to try to be in as long as I can. But I also realized, okay, meditating 1-2 hours a day, doing all these protocols, it takes a lot of time, effort, and energy, and we go through waves and stages. So just respecting yourself and understanding that, hey, there's going to be times where you're going to do that and you're going to be in this beautiful state for a certain period of time, but then life is bringing you into a bit of a different direction for you to experience this and to feel this because we want to do that. We don't just want to be in an extremely blissful state all the time. As magical as that sounds, it's the whole no pain, no pleasure kind of thing. So again, I don't know if that was like 100% the right thing to say, but at least from my perspective, that makes a lot of sense. And whenever I feel like I'm in a little bit of a slum or I feel more anxiety, I just understand that I'm just feeling it. I don't have anxiety. I just am experiencing the sensation of anxiety, but how can I manage that? So I kind of view it as a test. And now What can I do to rid the anxiety? Similar with pain. I have pain in my low back, okay, or in my neck. Okay, it's a test. How fast can I get out of this?
I love the
how can I
expression, this too
treat
shall
this?
pass. You know,
Yeah.
like that to me is so important because yes, absolutely. You know, we don't want to be in a blissful state all the time. And I think the biggest reason is we create solutions from suffering. If life is simple and easy, things don't need to be created because everything is easy and simple.
Well, and I could be I could be living off of almost no money. I could be meditating 8 hours a day and I would just be blissful, happy. I could go for walks. That's all great. But I don't think that's the point of us living here on earth. We're supposed to experience. We're supposed to be part of community. We're supposed to experience traumatic events, as
And
terrible as that
innovation is
sounds.
fun. I'd be bored
Yeah.
if I was blissful and like happy all the time. I mean,
Absolutely. We
innovation
need
is
to feel.
exciting. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we pass, whatever you believe in, maybe that'll kind of sheds off and you just feel infinite love. But really,
That's not our job right now.
why do we come back?
Yeah.
Why do we decide to come back? At least that's what I believe in. I do believe in that. And
We have a job to do.
exactly.
To elevate humanity to a better place. Each and every person, I believe, has that capacity within themselves to bring forth your God-given gifts and make them what they're supposed to be to have everyone in the world experience that, whether it's art, music, healing modalities, you know, figuring out new ways of building. I mean, we've got a broken world that has a lot of problems and there's a lot of solutions that will be created as a result of those problems. And that's where the innovation comes from.
Right.
And that's the fun part. I don't think this is supposed to be like an easy ride. It's not.
It's definitely not.
It's definitely not. And I think the majority of people in the world will acknowledge that, you know, it's not about like, you know, roller coasters and whatever. Like, I didn't even
so
mean to say
true.
roller coasters. Like, you know, it's not fun. There are times when it's fun, but that's not the purpose.
Right.
Is to just have fun and be happy.
Yeah.
The purpose is to increase frequency, to create something that you can leave that will be of benefit to those coming after you. And however many times we have to come back to learn the lessons and do that before we get to that place of infinite love, if that's what it is, which I believe as well. It is what it is, but it's exciting to be able to use your pain and suffering in a really proactive way.
Right.
And that's why, again, if we talk about pain is this beautiful thing that, again, everything comes down to how you look at it. Is it beautiful or is it ugly? If you view it as a beautiful thing and you have an approach to manage and then create something from it, then it's like failure. You know, I think all the entrepreneurs in the world, they don't ever see failure as failure. You just see that as, okay, I tried that. I love it in Think and Grow Rich. Fail fast, fail frequently, fail forward.
Right.
If you're not failing, you're not going to get anywhere because you're not just going to get on that right road and every choice you make is the right choice. You got to try stuff.
Absolutely.
And you got to fail to know, okay, that didn't work. I mean, I failed. I'm so comfortable with failing that, I mean, bring it on because, I mean, that's the only way we know that we're actually trying something new.
We failed so many times and we still do.
Well, we have to because we don't know what the best of the best is.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's a really cool perspective. I think everything you explained to kind of tie this all together, we're all connected with the same thing. And it all kind of mirrors itself to acute, to the chronic, to the emotional.
Yeah.
And we address it pretty well the same.
Yeah. And I think if there's sort of a message to be left here, it's we all have the capacity to be better physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually than we are in this moment. Like every one of us, whatever we are dealing with, and people are always asking, like, you know, does block therapy, for example, help with this, or this? I'm always going to say yes, because when you start to look after this system and you start to connect to your breath and you turn on that internal healing potential, things will improve. It will be very different for everybody based on the situation that you're starting with, your age, what you've accumulated, and what you need to release. But making those steps just one step at a time, then you start taking more steps. And before you know it, okay, well, I couldn't move my shoulder. Now I can move it a little bit. That's better than not moving it at all.
Totally.
Or being able to walk up the stairs or whatever. Or being able to sit down with somebody and actually having a hard discussion. Like those those relationship discussions are hard as well. And again, for me, that's where I really struggle, is like, I don't like conflict. I don't like making people feel bad. It's not making them feel bad. It's being truthful to who I am. But again, it's a learning, because if you're like, don't do that to someone else. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm beating myself up if I don't. So what makes more sense? Looking after someone else's needs or looking after my own? And we come from this place, especially women, I think more than men, where we shouldn't be selfish. Well, if we're not looking after this first, we can't be the best version for others. So I think it's the most selfless thing to do, to be able to figure out yourself.
That's the statement. You got to be selfish to be selfless.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this is really cool.
Yeah.
Really cool talk.
Yeah, thanks.
A lot of information. So whether you are currently going through acute, chronic emotional pain, hopefully this gave you some sort of insight into what exactly is going on. And if you need any assistance with this, check out, I would say, our Facebook community. That's huge. So just type in Block Therapy Community directly in Facebook, or you can find us on blocktherapy.com. Reach out to us. We'd love to chat and just help improve everybody.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all your insights, Quinn.
Yeah,
I love these conversations. Lots of fun.
These are the best.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining this episode of the Fascia Masters podcast. We'll see you in the next one.